What is up, everyone? My name is James McCool. That is the darkest picture that has ever happened to me. And I'm the owner of Paydirt.dfs.com. Today we're going to be doing the Week 11 NFL DFS Saturday stream. I think I'm right on that. I was wrong at one point earlier in the year about what week it was, and so now I'm self-conscious every single time that I say it. But I believe this is Week 11 for NFL. It should be a pretty good week. I have not heard there is all that many bad spots. I did do one slight look at the slate for Fantasy Life, which I have an article over there every week on 3 different stacks that you should be focusing on. But I didn't really see that many things that I thought were all that bad overall for the slate. I also know that there's going to be some people that are forcing in some kind of weird decisions. We're pretty sure that Devon Achan is going to be chalk, coming off of IR and probably still splitting work and now having to compete with Jeff Wilson in the background as well. I haven't looked at too many of the other chalk pieces. I think that Arizona is going to be chalk as a cheap stack. They were kind of popping in the models for sure, and I know that there have been other people talking about them as well. So I think Arizona will be chalk, but I mean they're cheap, and Kyler Murray is a huge boon to that offense. So I don't think that it is the worst chalk. I think that we certainly have seen worse this year in terms of chalk that I certainly would not be into. But overall, looks like it's probably going to be a pretty good week. What is up, Ike? Sup? Divine Chang, I guess. I don't know how the fuck to pronounce his name. I'm not even going to try. Mike, what's up, dude? How you doing? Hope that you've been enjoying the League of Legends grind. I have been playing Diablo 4. If you have not been playing Diablo 4, if you gave up on Diablo 4 because they fucked up some patches, which they certainly did, you should get back into it. It's playing pretty well. The current season, the Season of Blood or whatever it is, been pretty fun. You get to kill a bunch of vampires. It's pretty sick. And the next season looks good, and then the expansion that they just teased at BlizzCon looks pretty sick too. So if you have not been playing Diablo 4, you should probably play it. You've been grinding zombies in the new COD. I have not played a COD game since like probably a decade ago. And I'm not even that's not even an exaggeration. I have not played COD in a fucking long time. Anyway, people don't care about that. What people care about is the wine. This wine is called Three Finger Jack. It is a rum barrel aged wine. It's a red. I don't know anything much else about it. I'm trying to be better about knowing what my wines are and becoming an actual wine guy. But last couple weeks I've done coffee. I already had coffee going through the NBA slate, which hopefully I win. So I'm doing wine here. But let's go ahead and talk about some football. So if you are new to the stream, first off, hello, how you doing? I hope that you enjoy. But usually what we'll do is we'll take a top-down look at the slate first. We're going to look at the macro stuff. We're going to look at team totals. We're going to look at expected touchdown rates. We're going to look at all that kind of different cool stuff. And then we're going to work our way down into the stacks that we should be interested in. Then we're going to take a look at each one of the positional things. We're going to be taking a look at where the chalk is lying, what the models are liking over at Paydirt. And then we're going to jump into figuring out what stacks are the best and what we should surround them with. We're going to end with some chalk talk and thinking about pivots, and then some final thoughts on the slate. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in chat. I will be paying attention the best that I can. I'm pretty good about chat, I think. Usually I'm better when Zach's here. But yeah, I don't know if Zach's here. He's a busy guy, so yeah. Just got in. What wine are we on tonight? So this is, as I said, Three Finger Jack. It is a rum barrel aged red. It's delicious. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, like it. So let's go ahead and jump into some macro stuff, shall we? We're going to go full screen here. This is just in the research tables over at Paydirt. You can find this. This is one of the free research models, the NFL research sheet. So all this stuff's free that I'm showing right now. We'll get into the paywalled stuff here in a second. So let's widen this out a little bit and take a look. So overall, the highest team total on the slate is Miami with a team total of 29.75. It is by far the highest total on the slate. 2 points over Detroit versus Chicago. Houston, surprisingly, has a really, really high team total. I think that people are maybe over their skis a little bit on Stroud. Stroud is really, really good, and it shows that he's really good. When you look at quarterbacks overall in the season, if I sort by dropbacks, or no, let's sort by let's sort by fantasy rank, right? So Josh Allen is the top overall QB in fantasy in terms of raw points, but that's mostly because he just played a game. CJ Stroud is the 6th best in the league, has 184 PPR points so far, but his inside the 5 rush is not all that great. His yards per attempt is really good, 8.6. That is 3rd in the league behind Tua and Brock Purdy. His ADOT is the best in the league at 9.27 in terms of any quarterback. Well, Jordan Love is at 9.47, but he sucks, so we're not worried about that. But Stroud, like, he looks fine. His pass yards per completion is really good. 8.26 in terms of pass yards per completion. But I just have to think that his touchdown rate is probably going to come down. His touchdown rate is really, really high in terms of touchdowns per pass attempt. And that's usually something that signals regression. If it doesn't regress this year, it'll regress next year. But I just think that people are maybe over their skis a little bit on him. That said, Houston does have the 2nd highest pass touchdown expectation at 2.03. So they're probably going to be a pretty popular stack and probably justifiably so this week. San Francisco and Dallas carry up the rest of the team totals over 26. San Francisco at 26.75, Dallas at 26.5. I was talking to Dwayne McFarland over at Fantasy Life, and him and I are just blown away by what Brock Purdy is doing. Like, his efficiency is just through the roof. His yards per attempt is almost a full yard above anybody else in the league. And his ADOT is not that high. He only has 27.8 attempts per game, which is really not that high at all. When we're looking at yards per attempt here, his yards per attempt is 9.32. And he has the 27th highest attempts per game in the league. Like, he is barely above, like, the borderline bottom of the bucket. The only QB that is having as good of a season as he is, that is throwing less per game, is Lamar Jackson at 27.5. And his yards per attempt is 8.08, which is much lower than Brock Purdy. So Brock Purdy's efficiency has just been ridiculous. And people don't look at him the same way they're looking at Stroud. But as far as upside goes, the only difference here is that CJ Stroud is throwing more per game. CJ Stroud, 35.3 attempts per game. Brock Purdy, 27.8. So that extra, 7 attempts per game, that's what's separating these guys. But the efficiency is really, really good for Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy's weapons are really good too. Brandon Ayuk is awesome. Deebo Samuel is awesome. He has Christian McCaffrey, who can be a receiving target. So San Francisco in this spot, I think that Brock Purdy and San Francisco stacks are going to go way under-owned here. And we'll take a look at the stacks and stuff like that too. But I just got to think that Brock Purdy stacks are going to go way under-owned here. The volume is low, and I get that, but the efficiency is just through the roof. So Brock Purdy just looks really, really good here. After that, we drop down. We do have, let's see, who else is on this main slate? We're going to jump over to the range of outcomes here really quick. So as we're looking at team totals, because I can look here too. I guess we'll just close up on the screen here. As far as team totals, that's weird. Why is Miami showing 29.75 here in one spot? Miami, Detroit, San Francisco, Houston, Dallas. And then the next one, we have Chargers stacks who end up being in this 23.5 range. But this is relatively cheap, of course, for Charger stack if you ignore Keenan Allen. We have Seattle and we have Jacksonville. So all of these teams just kind of lumped in to this 23 range, right? You get a pretty big drop after Dallas at 26.5. So these are really the teams that you have the biggest focus on. This Miami, Detroit, San Francisco, Houston, and Dallas range. And when you're looking at ownership, almost for sure, San Francisco is going to go way under Houston. They're going to go way under Detroit. They're going to go way under Miami. I wouldn't be surprised if San Francisco stacks all ended up under 20% owned. And especially when you compare it with Arizona stacks, which I expect to be the highest projected owned. Yeah, Kyler Murray, Marquise Brown, Trey McBride. That should be the highest owned stack on the entire slate. Like San Francisco looks like just a screaming deal in GPPs, for sure. I really like it a lot. So, as far as passing touchdown expectation, the highest is Miami and then Houston, followed by Dallas, Kansas City, Detroit. And then you get kind of into the weeds a little bit here. Highest rushing touchdown expectation goes to Miami, of course, and then Detroit, and then Baltimore, and then San Francisco. So San Francisco here pretty even, 1.49 expected passing touchdowns, 1.33 expected rushing touchdowns. As far as dropback volume, it's going to be Carolina at the top at 41 dropbacks, and then we actually have quite a few teams who are in this 40 range. So Cincinnati was projected for 40, Minnesota projected for 41, Kansas City projected for 41, and then the Chargers and Washington each projected at 39. Washington has been consistently in the higher range in terms of dropbacks. So that's a spot where you would expect them to continue to, chase that, unless you think that the Giants are just going to roll over and die, which is totally fair. And Mike, to your point, should the projection be higher than 15 for Brian Robinson with Gibson out? The reason why it's so low is specifically because of this dropback volume. They've been a team that has been significantly more pass heavy than run heavy. They're only projected for 22 designed rushing attempts. If you think that the Giants just cannot put up a fight whatsoever, and if you think that Washington is going to run the ball 39 times instead of pass the ball 39 times, then yeah, Brian Robinson is going to have a much higher projection. But a projection of 15 is even still fine. Like that, when we get to the chalk, we're going to see that Brian Robinson, I'm going to say that he's a totally fine play, and that I think that he should be chalk here. But the volume concerns are real. Washington, if I go over and look at what Washington has been in terms of team styles here, and this is over at Fantasy Life. So Washington so far this year has not had a single game with a dropback rate below 60%. 62% against Arizona. They had a 76% against Buffalo. They had 91% against Chicago. Oh, here's a 58%. Sorry, I lied. They had a 58% against Atlanta, right? And that's the only game that they have been under pass rate over expectation, right? That's the only game where they have been under the league average in terms of what we would have expected them to drop back. We would have expected a 59% drop back rate here. So they're just a team that really wants to fucking pass a lot. And it just is what it is. So no, it's not just them playing from behind a lot. Like the drop back over expectation paints them as, I'm pretty sure, the highest drop back over expectation team in the league. I can go check that really quick. In terms of yearly drop back over expectation, they are the third highest in the league at 8.3 adjusted. Cincinnati is at 8.4 and Kansas City is at 9.4. The lowest in the league is Atlanta at negative 6.5. So that, like, it's a scheme thing. That it's not a them playing from behind a lot. It's a scheme thing. They pass a lot, and that's actually Eric Bieniemy, who has brought over a much pass heavier offense from Kansas City. So we mostly expect them to continue to be pass heavier. If you think that they're going to be more of this 58% range, I won't fight you on that. I think that's fine. But I'm going to say that Brian Robinson is a good play one way or another. I'm not super concerned about the volume stuff here because the Giants suck so many dicks, and the efficiency should be really, really good for Brian Robinson in that run game overall. There is going to be opportunity, I think, to get off of Brian Robinson. If I go and look at, let's see, for Washington, who do they have behind him? Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, Alec Arma, whatever the fuck that is, Derek Gore, and Chris Rodriguez. So Chris Rodriguez is somebody who I think is, if he plays, is he in? Suppose I can go check. Yeah, Chris Rodriguez. If he's in, like, I'll have interest in him too. But I need to make sure that he's in. Because he did miss some time earlier on in the year. Yeah, he's in. In week 7, he had 7 attempts for 31 yards. In week 6, he had 4 attempts for 23 yards. His averages on the year are pretty good. And I know that overall, like, people were pretty high on him coming into the year. So I think that he is probably somebody to look at 4K. He's really, really cheap. Brian Robinson, I think, is what, in that 6K range? Yeah, 5,800. But last week, obviously, he only had 8 attempts. He had 18 against New England, 18 against Denver. What was he in that Atlanta game? He only had 10 attempts for 31 yards in that Atlanta game. His efficiency has been god-awful overall. Like, his averages have been really, really bad. So, I don't know. It's an interesting spot, though, one way or another. Let's go ahead and get back into the macro stuff here really quick. So that's the drop back stuff. As far as designed rushing attempts, the highest is Cleveland against Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Dallas, and Detroit, all in that 28 range, and then Miami at 26. Let's see. T1 or Suning? T1 now. I mean, you got to go with you just got to go with the GOAT, man. I don't know how you fade Faker in this spot. He's been playing really, really well. T1 overall is just so good. So good. Suning, obviously, coming from the Chinese league is top tier, but I just got to side with Faker on this one. You hope that Robinson is getting targets. That's probably not going to happen. Like, he got 6 targets last week, but I think that was just, like, they didn't really have a plan outside of Antonio Gibson. And I think that Chris Rodriguez probably picks up that role. The only other time this year that he has had more than 2 targets in a game was against Chicago, and they were down by fucking a million. So he had 4 targets in that game. I would take the far under on 6 targets that he got last week. He's not a receiving back. He just isn't. So I wouldn't expect that. I think that it would be Chris Rodriguez getting the rushing work. If I had to guess, I would think that it's probably, if this game goes the way that everybody expects it to go, I would guess that Brian Robinson probably gets like 18 to 20 carries and 1 or 2 targets, and Chris Rodriguez gets like 8 to 10 carries and 4 to 5 targets. That's going to be my guess on the split here. Let's see. All right, so let's jump into stacks here. And I already have stacks open, so that's really nice. Overall, top median, we'll zoom in here. Top median is going to be this Miami, Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle stack. That makes sense. There's no questioning that, really. It is also, I'm pretty sure, the most expensive stack that you can pay for. So that takes it down a little bit. After that, we have some Rams, Buffalo, Dallas, Detroit, Dallas, Houston, Buffalo, Chargers. Detroit looks okay here. The Sam Ross, St. Brown, and Sam Laporta one. I do want to do that thing that we did last week where we sort this by team total as well, and we'll do that here in a second. So as far as the top overall stacks, kind of drops off a cliff after Houston, which is Miami, Rams, Buffalo, Dallas, Detroit, Houston. If we look at the best values, it's far and away Arizona. I guess we'll sort by 3x here. Arizona, Houston, Green Bay. Jordan Love looked pretty good last week. Then Houston, Arizona, Green Bay, Washington. I wouldn't be surprised if it's just Washington, Arizona, and Green Bay in terms of values. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to play Houston stacks. I think that they'll be too highly owned. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to play traditional Arizona stacks. I think they're going to be too highly owned. But we'll see. Let's go ahead and sort this by team total. So Miami stacks obviously look great. They are expensive. Detroit stacks are a step down in price, but then we have San Francisco. San Francisco, none of the stacks you have here, Ayuk Kittle, Debo Kittle, or Debo Ayuk, none of these cost over 20K. This is a really, really nice stack to focus on, and for sure, we're going to be really focused on San Francisco this week. I know that they're popping in the contest sims as well. So just really, really like San Francisco here. Same thing with Houston. When we look at Houston versus San Francisco, these are basically the same stacks, but Houston is going to be twice as highly owned as San Francisco. Maybe 3 times as highly owned. But, I mean, still, good stack here. Projections are really, really nice in Houston's favor over San Francisco, and the price is a little bit less. Team total is about the same. And then Dallas. Dallas is expensive. CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Dak Prescott over 21K. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson over 21K. CeeDee Lamb is very expensive, obviously. But the team total is nice at 26.5. So that's pretty nice as well. I don't think you can really fade CeeDee Lamb and play this cheaper one, so this one is kind of off the board anyway. But we'll see that when we go ahead and run the pivots and see what we can get to. After that, man, it gets pretty bad. These 23.5s, the prices are okay on Jacksonville stacks. Like Lawrence, Kirk, and Evan Ingram looks fine at 16.3. Seattle stacks are way too cheap, I think, for their team total. At 15.7 for Metcalf and Noah Fant, or 15.3 for Lockett and Noah Fant. Like, these stacks are probably too cheap for having a good team total here. This is probably the first one that really sticks off the board for me overall. You do have to pay 19.3 for Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, but I wouldn't do that anyway, I don't think. Then we have Chargers stacks with Keenan Allen, Donald Parham, Keenan Allen, and Jalen Guitan. I don't think we're going to get the same ownership discount that we got on Keenan Allen last week, but if we do, he's going to be a very good play again. Then we have Buffalo stacks, and Buffalo stacks don't look great overall. They're too expensive, and the team total is relatively low, but nobody's going to be on this shit. Like, nobody is going to touch Buffalo stacks, and I really, really think that that's a spot that we can focus on, especially after they just fired their OC. They're struggling. They're getting pretty desperate. They're really at risk of missing the playoffs. So I think that they come out here, and I think that they probably just put it on Josh Allen's shoulders and tell him that he needs to go out there and win the game for them. So Buffalo stacks, I think, they're not going to have any ownership. They're relatively expensive. But we know what the upside is here, right? Like Stephon Diggs, one of the things that I wrote that was crazy in the Fantasy Life article, Stephon Diggs has only had 3 games in the last 2 years with less than double-digit fantasy points. One was last week, and then 2 of them were last year towards the end of the season when he wasn't playing full snaps. And that's fucking crazy. Stephon Diggs is probably the most consistent fantasy player in the league, I think. I can't think of a player that is more consistent than he is. And he's going to have basically no ownership. So this week, Stephon Diggs might be the guy. And we'll take a look at ownership, and we'll take a look at that kind of stuff. But Stephon Diggs looks really, really good. Buffalo stacks look really good as well. So let's go ahead and move on from that. Let's go ahead and take a look at QBs. We'll zoom back in. So QBs, top overall projection is CJ Stroud and then Dak Prescott. Both of them are 7K. And then Josh Allen. Josh Allen's just ungodly expensive, right? That's why he's only going to be 3% owned. Justin Fields should be back, 6,900. That's a really nice price. If he is healthy, we can expect the rushing equity to still be there. So if he's healthy, Justin Fields is a really, really good play. And then Brock Purdy, man, just 5,800. That is such a good price. I will take the fucking big under on 12.3, man. I'll take a huge under on 12.3% on him. I do not think that he will be that highly owned. And then Kyler Murray down here, 15% owned, projecting for less than all of these guys. But, I mean, he's only 6,100, so it makes sense. Taking a look at running backs, let's go ahead and just sort by ownership. So, Devin Singletary projecting as, like, the heavy chalk. He did get 30 opportunities last week. I get it. But that's not a consistent thing that Houston has been doing, and I don't think that that is going to be something that they want to do again. Houston has been one of the teams in the league that has been much more pass-heavy, and Singletary, I think last week, that was just an aberration. We can go over and we can check the stats for Houston overall running backs. He had 81% of the snaps, 91% of the rushing attempts, which is fine. Like, that's fine. But overall, man, like, 23 PPR points, 30 rushing attempts. I just don't see it. There were so many plays last game, and that is by far the most rushing attempts that this team has had so far in a game. Dameon Pierce had 24 in week 4 on 40 snaps. I do not see 30 attempts again. And it took him 30 attempts to get 23 PPR points. I just don't see it, man. I think he drops way back down here, and people are going to chase something that I just don't think is realistic. So him at way too highly owned here at 5,300. And then we have Brian Robinson at 23%. I think that probably sticks around there. 23 to 30% makes a lot of sense. Like I said, it's a volume concern with Washington. It's not necessarily an efficiency concern. Brian Robinson hasn't been very good overall, but he's still gotten there in a couple weeks. I just think it's a volume thing. Then we're going to have Etienne, then Breece Hall, and then Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey at 15% owned. Always a nice spot to be. It'll be interesting to see how people handle Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is in arguably the same spot this week that he was last week. He ended up 20-something% owned and was a little bit more expensive. I don't think that he necessarily played especially badly. I just think that he runs really, really bad in the red zone. 15 rushing attempts last week wasn't too bad. He only had 0 targets. That's probably the thing that killed him the most. He had 0 targets, but he did have 28 routes. He just didn't have any targets. Ended up with 6 fantasy points. I think that this is a pretty clear flop lag situation on Tony Pollard because he's still getting the work. He's still getting plenty of snaps. He's still getting plenty of inside the 5 attempts. Like, he's getting 1.4 per game. And he's just not scoring touchdowns. That's a big thing. So his routes are still fine. It's just like, he's just not getting the touchdowns. So I think that he's probably still fine. It seems like a flop lag spot for Tony Pollard. I think he's a really, really good play. Especially if he comes in under 15% owned. If this continues to trend down, I really, really like Tony Pollard. Let's go ahead and look at medians here. So Gibbs at 7K, his ownership doesn't look high enough. Brian Robinson, his ownership looks great. We're going to have, again, no ownership on Saquon Barkley. We're going to have absolutely no ownership on Raheem Mostert. I think that Akan is probably going to end up being, he projects for 8% owned right now. I think he's going to way jump up there. I think he's going to be one of the trending players to talk about tomorrow. I'm interested in Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall has been really, really good at 16% owned. That seems like a nice spot, but we'll see. Let's go ahead and jump into wide receivers. So let's look at ownership here. Tank Dell, no surprise. Rondale Moore, no surprise. Marquise Brown, no surprise. Like these cheap Houston wide receivers, the cheap Houston and Arizona wide receivers are going to be highly owned. DJ Moore is a little bit surprising. I think people are putting some blind trust in Justin Fields there. Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley. It doesn't look like there's going to be that much high ownership on wide receivers. It looks like it's going to be pretty spread out. Cooper Kupp, no ownership. CeeDee Lamb, no ownership. Keenan Allen, no ownership. Like people would rather just pay up somewhere else, I guess, or just pay for Tyreek Hill. But it looks like the mid-range, it looks like pretty spread out, so we don't really have to worry that much about that. Let's go and look at tight ends really quick. Trey McBride's going to be fucking 40% owned. He's going to be huge owned. And that doesn't surprise me. He's been really, really good. And I think that Arizona is going to continue to utilize him a lot. Kyler Murray likes him a lot. So people are going to pair him a lot with Kyler Murray. I think that Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, and Marquise Brown stacks are going to be fucking giga owned. And it's going to inflate the ownership of other more expensive pieces. You know, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, those kind of guys. So you can do some legit stars and studs lineups this week without too many issues. Evan Ingram, the next highest owned at 18%, and then Cole Kmet. I don't know if people are going to be on Dalton Kincaid, but they should. Dalton Kincaid has been the best tight end in football for the last 4 weeks. Dalton Schultz, I think, is going to be a little bit lower owned than he should be. Sam Laporta is definitely going to be too low owned. If he's only going to be 6% owned, Laporta and Kincaid have both had the best roles in all of fantasy for the last couple weeks. So really like paying up at tight end this week where people are trying to pay down in this lower 4K range. I love Laporta and I love Kincaid, and I'm probably going to try to get stacks of those guys overall. It just seems like a really interesting week from ownership in terms of wide receivers and tight ends. It looks really spread out. People are focusing a lot of ownership, I think, on Brian Robinson and Devin Singletary and a couple of these other guys that are going to be higher owned at running back. But overall, it looks like the ownership is pretty spread out for wide receivers and tight ends. I didn't see too many bad chalk pieces there. This is kind of the first time that I'm looking at this slate from like an actual individual player basis. I think Tank Dell is probably going to be overowned. Rondale Moore is for sure going to be fucking overowned. That dude fucking doesn't do things. What are people chasing from last week? I didn't even pay attention to him last week. People are chasing... Hold the fucking phone. People want to play Rondale Moore, 3,300,
when he had basically the best possible game last week that he could possibly have and only had 9 fantasy points. He had 8 targets for 43 yards and 9 fantasy points. Guys, he doesn't fucking do anything. Like, he can't do anything. It's like a 12-year-old trying to play football, man. Like, he's just going to get broken in half on one of these fucking swing routes. He doesn't score touchdowns. He doesn't run deep routes. He doesn't run real routes. He's just a glorified slot running backs, man. Just terrible plan of action. If Rondale Moore is going to be 20% owned and I don't make money this week, I'm quitting. I will just quit everything that I'm doing. Let's see, answer some questions. Amon-Ra St. Brown, pretty consistent. Yeah, so one of the things you can do over at Fantasy Life is actually go to season stats. And I implemented this myself because I thought that it was cool. But if you go to wide receivers and you go to routes, let's just say you have to have run 52 reps this year, and you do minimum PPR points, Amon-Ra St. Brown actually has the best floor of any wide receiver in the league. His floor PPR points is 16.2 this year, which is really, really cool. Tyreek Hill is at 10. Keenan Allen is 9.5. So, like, as far as floor performances go, Amon-Ra St. Brown has not had a game worse than 16.2 fantasy points, which is, it's really cool to see that. So you're right. Amon-Ra St. Brown, very consistent. Love the hat. Damn straight. I need to get Margaret to put it on the merch page because I love this hat. Like, I wear this hat more than I wear a lot of other hats. Let's see. Yeah, Pollard in the same spot every week. His coach hates running. His coach doesn't really hate running all that much. He just fucking, like, Tony Pollard just runs bad, man. Like, he should have way more touchdowns than he does. If Tony Pollard has, like, 5 more touchdowns than he does, then people are playing him fucking, like, 30% owned this week at 6,600. Instead, he's going to be, like, 13 to 15% owned in a spot where he deserves to be, like, 30% owned. So I think there's going to be a lot of meat on the bone there. Let's see. He said it's just a thumb for Fields, should be fine. Yeah, I agree with that. They were up in $1 million and throwing bombs down the field like they were playing Madden. Yeah, I don't think that continues. A lot of people have made a lot of... I think that people are taking the last 2 weeks out of context of what they have been for the majority of the season. Like if I go look at Dallas and their pass rate over expectation. So last week, they still only had a 62% dropback rate. We would have expected them to have a higher dropback rate. The dropback over expectation for last week was actually negative. The week before that, it was 11% over the league average. But for the most part, man, they sit within like 1 to 2% of where they should be. Most part, their dropback over expectation is 2%, plus 2%. So they throw 2% more than the league average. They're just not really a team that passes a lot. They're a balanced team. They have a dropback rate of 60%. They are neutral to slow in terms of their plays per minute. They score a lot of points on defense. So I don't think that they really hate running. I just think that they throw the ball deep down the field when they get the opportunity and they can, like, smell blood. And that's kind of the thing. Like, this team, Dallas, is really, really good and really, really potent against shitty teams. They can beat up on really bad teams. They'll beat up on Carolina this week. There's, like, no doubt in my mind they'll beat up on Carolina this week. Bryce Young is a fucking chud. Like, the dude sucks. But I don't think that they're necessarily a team that wants to pass a lot, and I don't think they are a team that does pass a lot. And I think that Tony Pollard is just going to get thrown to the side here. I think he's a really, really good play. I think that him and Stephon Diggs this week are probably the plays that people are undervaluing the most, because Stephon Diggs is going to be like fucking like 5% owned or something like Keenan Allen last week. And this is a spot where, like, Buffalo fired their offensive coordinator, and they had the players meeting, and, like, there's been a whole bunch of media around Diggs, and, like, that if Diggs doesn't have 12 targets this week, I'll be fucking blown away. It's a good matchup. It's a spot for them to get right. It's a get right spot for Buffalo. Like, I think Buffalo puts up the most points in the league this week. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on. So we're going to do some stack finders here. So as we were looking at the overall stacks and range of outcomes here, teams that we were most interested in were Miami, Buffalo, Dallas, Detroit, and Houston. We could say the Rams, but I think that this stack, like, we can say the Rams, but I'm not really interested in them. Mostly it's Miami, Buffalo, Dallas, Detroit, and Houston. So let's go ahead and run the stack finder. We're going to run QB plus 2. We're going to say max salary is 50,000 just so we can make sure that we get every single combo, and we'll run the stack analysis. So overall, the first one, of course, is Miami because it projects for the best. After that, Rams, sure, and then Buffalo, and then Dallas. But then we don't get Detroit, and we don't get Houston. Both Detroit and Houston are projecting for more ownership than their projections actually allow. So that makes sense to me. Houston is going to be far too owned. Just far too owned. And I'm going to guess that Arizona is going to be far too owned too. I don't think we'll see any Arizona here whatsoever. Yeah, we don't. And that's on QB plus 2s, right? So Miami, Rams, Buffalo, Dallas, and then a whole bunch more Buffalo. So again, Buffalo just way under-owned. Let's go ahead and do some QB plus 1s. QB plus 1, we have Tyreek Hill and Tua. And then we have Miami, Dallas, Chargers, Buffalo, and then fucking Carolina with Adam Thielen, right? Again, we don't see any Detroit. We don't see any Houston. In this one, we're actually missing, what was the other one that we had here? Oh yeah, Rams. So we're missing Rams out of this one. Just Miami, Dallas, Chargers, and then Buffalo. And then you have a serious drop to Adam Thielen and Bryce Young. And then you have another serious drop to Aiden O'Connell and Jacoby Myers. So really it's just these four. Miami, Dallas, Chargers, Buffalo. And that's consistent with both, right? Those are really the teams that we're most interested in here. Miami, Buffalo, Rams, Dallas. Yeah. The only team that we didn't have... Man, the wine is really hitting me hard here. Anyway... Miami, Buffalo, Dallas, really, really liking those stacks overall. We're not getting any Arizona. If we go to specific teams and we go to run some Arizona stacks so we can see actually what the stacks are that we would be interested in using. Oh, that's interesting. What do you mean it doesn't encounter an error? This isn't even an actual error. Oh, it's because I didn't choose a team. The wine, it's winning. Anyway, Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, Marquise Brown. That's the top stack. And then after that, you have McBride and Wilson. Fine. And then Marquise Brown and Wilson. And then Marquise Brown and bullshit. And then Michael Wilson and bullshit. Overall, if it were me, which it will be tomorrow, if I was playing Arizona stacks, I probably just wouldn't play Marquise Brown and Trey McBride together at all. Michael Wilson and Trey McBride is much cheaper and I think projects pretty well overall. I wouldn't fucking touch Rondale Moore. You see, there's no Rondale Moore in these combos whatsoever. Whew. Yeah, Wilson's questionable. But if he plays, like, I'd much rather have him. We're going to look at the report. Shoulder was added to the injury report Friday and listed as questionable for Sunday's game. So he returned for the week in 10, and then is listed as questionable. Might have suffered a setback here. If he misses, then I'm probably more interested in Greg Dortch than I am in Rondale Moore. I'm not fucking playing Rondale Moore, man. Actually, here's the thing. I hope Michael Wilson misses so that it gets more people on Rondale Moore so that more people can pay more rake. Because Rondale Moore is the worst fucking play that you could possibly have this week, especially if he's 20% owned. Just giga trash. So, all of that to be said, let's finish this up. Right? Man, that is dark. I need a ring light or some shit. What can I do here? There we go. All right. Let's finish this up. So, overall, the spots that we like the most. Miami looks really good. High team total. Condensed offense. Really like them. Dallas, I don't think that people are going to be on them as much as they were last week. CeeDee Lamb looks way underowned. Tony Pollard looks way underowned. I would not be mad at going back to a Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb stack for a second week in a row. But I really, really like Tony Pollard. I think that he's probably one of the best plays on the slate, especially if he's under 15%. Buffalo, look, man, Buffalo's in a good get right spot. The script writers fired the OC. Now the script writer is going to be like, the OC was the problem. This is a Josh Allen legacy game. He's going to put up 40 fantasy points and throw 3 touchdowns to Stephon Diggs and 1 touchdown to Dalton Kincaid and win $70 million. That's the Buffalo script. So I really, really like Buffalo. Detroit looked good as well. They're a little bit overowned, but I think for the most part, they probably look fine. And then, like the Chargers didn't look too bad. Let's see. Is there anybody that I'm missing here? No, it doesn't really look like it. Houston looks overowned, and the Rams. I mean, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Matthew Stafford looks way underowned. They're gonna kind of set the table in terms of relative value stacks, but the Rams look fine. I don't know if I can go there in 5 stacks. But that is a good game environment. Seattle and the Rams, that's a good game environment. So if Seattle can get it going, then I think that all of those are probably fine. And yeah, it's Stafford. He's going to play. But yeah, those are the main ones. And then San Francisco. That's the other stack that was kind of left off the board here, but I love San Francisco stacks. So Miami, Dallas, Detroit, Buffalo. Miami, Buffalo, Dallas, Detroit, Rams, and San Francisco. Those are kind of the 6. And of those, I would probably say that my main interests are going to be Miami, Detroit, Buffalo, and San Francisco. Those are the ones that I am the most interested in, with the Rams being kind of like a secondary option and Dallas being a secondary option, because I like Tony Pollard a lot more than I like actual Dallas stacks. So as far as bad chalk, just don't fucking play Rondale Moore. Probably, I cannot think of a worse play this week than Rondale Moore. Trey McBride is fine. Marquise Brown is fine. If Michael Wilson plays, I think he's a way better play than Rondale Moore by a long shot and for only $100 more. If Michael Wilson doesn't play, I think Greg Dortch is a better play than Rondale Moore for $300 less. Just don't fucking play Rondale Moore. That's a terrible idea. As far as chalk goes, I do really like Brian Robinson. I think he's fine. I don't think that he's going to have all the receiving work, but I do think that he's going to have all the rushing work, or most of the rushing work. If you want to take a flyer on Chris Rodriguez, I think I'm fine with that too. At 4K, he's underpriced for what I think his role will be. I do think that he will have 15-plus opportunities and touches on the ball. Might even have some red zone work. We'll see. And then as far as chalk at wide receiver, who even was wide receiver chalk? I didn't think that it was much. I think it seemed fine. Tank Dell. I'm just not interested, I don't think, in going after that Houston-Arizona game. The only way that I go after the Houston-Arizona game would be going from the Arizona side. And what I would do is I would overstack it, and I would go with the Arizona side. I would fade Rondale Moore, and I would probably fade Tank Dell. And go with Nico Collins instead, who is questionable. But if Nico Collins plays, I think that I would probably fade Tank Dell and Rondale Moore, and then just have like 6 players from that game, 5 or 6 players from that game, and just hope that it goes to the fucking moon, and that those guys get left out. And that would be enough fantasy points to really get there. But overall, this looks like a good week. I don't think that there are that many pieces of terrible chalk outside of Rondale Moore. Just don't fucking touch him. I didn't look at defensive ownership this week, but obviously don't play the highest owned defense. If it's Dallas, if you want to pair Tony Pollard and the Dallas defense, whatever, go for it. I think that you shouldn't, but if you want to, whatever. And then the other thing that I'll say is there's actually some pretty decent game environments. I didn't look at game and totals this week like I usually do, but Chicago-Detroit doesn't seem too bad. I think that Justin Fields with DJ Moore with an Amon-Ra St. Brown bring back is not bad. Houston-Arizona looks pretty good. I like the Rams in Seattle. I think that looks like a pretty good game environment as well. There's some pretty good players in that game on both sides. So, yeah, I think this looks like a pretty good week. Overall, just go with the best you can and just avoid the bad chalk of Rondale Moore. And look to utilize some lower-owned stacks. I think that Buffalo looks like a really good spot. I think that Detroit looks really good. And Miami probably is not going to be highly owned enough. So, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to write an article, obviously, tomorrow morning, finalizing all these thoughts after we do some more ownership stuff. But if you don't have a Paydirt subscription to go read that article, you should go get one. I'm going to shamelessly plug Paydirt here for a second. So if you guys, want to watch me plug it, then you can. But, Paydirt, I think, is providing a lot of value across all the different sports. You can get an all-access sub for just $40 a month. That includes everything in terms of sports and traditional sports. Or you can get some overall yearly sports, or you can just join for a week or a day. You can always ask anybody who's in the community in the Discord if they think the models are worth it, and I can almost guarantee that they'll say yes. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for supporting me. I'm going to jump off and go sweat out my NBA lineups. But if you guys have any questions, reach out in the Discord. It's free to join. Or follow me on Twitter over at Paydirt_DFS. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow. So again, thank you. Talk to you tomorrow.